Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of Millionaire in the Making. I'm Rachel, and I'm all about helping couples and families get organized and get wealthy. This weekly series includes budget walkthroughs for real people. I feature their real numbers, and I provide a roadmap to millionaire status and beyond. Let's create a plan for a 32-year-old business owner living in Albany, New York, earning $240,000 a year. She is expecting her first child soon, she invests in real estate, and her business is really taking off. Follow along as I prepare her for tax season, position her to have $7,000 saved when her baby arrives, and start her investing journey beyond real estate. Shake what your money gave you. Let's do it. I always say we can't budget our money until we know our money. So let's start by seeing where her debt, savings, and investing stand today. Here are her debts. We've got 2 personal loans, student loans, a car loan, and a mortgage. I did list these highest interest rate to lowest, and it's nice to see that she doesn't have any credit card debt, but still we have some high interest debt going on here. This top line here, this first personal loan, $22,500 as a balance and an 18% interest rate. This is definitely the one that draws my eye. The second personal loan, quite a bit lower of a balance, still a 10% interest rate. And then the remaining 3 lines here don't really give me pause. I did put an asterisk here next to student loans because there may be some forgiveness options here. Kind of difficult to tell what the payoff date may be. She may not end up having to pay all this $29,000. But again, want to emphasize that we're really going to want to pay off this first personal loan as fast as possible because the interest is really setting her back every single month. Altogether, her debts are about $466,000, and each month she's paying a little over $3,000 towards minimum debt payments. Next, we can look at what she covers every single month. On the left side here, I've got these in order by due date. So I mentioned that she's a real estate investor. So the home that she owns that she's renting out, we've got the mortgage for that here at the top. And she does rent an apartment with her partner. So this $400 here is her contribution to that rent payment. But everything else here, we've got her cell phone, utilities, minimum debt payments, nothing too crazy. I like to list the variable spending here as well, because this is all going to factor into her emergency fund calculations when we try to set goals for what her emergency fund should be. So we've got food captured here, fuel, pet costs, and then she does currently have a therapy line item. It's costing her about $600 a month. So we have that listed there. And we use these figures. I've got some items checked as a need. We're going to add together all of those needs, and we'll pop over to the emergency fund side of this. So when we add together all those items, her monthly necessary expenses add up to $6,343.88. That is the total of her core expenses, right? Those non-negotiables: food, housing, transportation, minimum debt payments that she cannot miss. That's what we're looking at for a month of those charges. What she's got set aside today for her emergency fund is $1,000. So down here below, her starter emergency fund goal, kind of that first milestone that I like to suggest people strive towards, is this 1 month of expenses saved. So I'll just put 6,345, kind of round it up there. And then when we look longer term at her full emergency fund goal, we take a couple things into consideration. She is expecting her first child. She does own a home. She's also self-employed, and I think that's an important element to consider here. So I would say she should really strive for that high end of this range, which would be 6 months. So her full emergency fund goal would be right around $38,000. So this would be that longer term goal. Obviously, we'll stretch that out probably across a couple of years to reach this amount, but this is ultimately what we'd like to reach for a personal emergency fund. So here we have the savings bucket tracker, where we can look at all those different savings efforts. I call them savings buckets. You might have heard the term sinking funds. Same concept. We've got her emergency fund that we were just discussing on the last page. She's also got a business emergency fund, which I really, really like. And she's got a starting balance there of $1,000. Now for her rental property, home maintenance, this is not a bucket that she has set up currently. Instead, she just budgets about $300 a month to go towards these types of expenses. But I definitely think it should be a bucket and one that she just gradually grows, because these costs are coming. And if these are costs that you anticipate, you might as well set up a bucket for it. So I've got that one listed here. Starting balance is 0. Car maintenance, she recently had to deplete. So we're starting at 0, but that one is in place. We can turn the page and go ahead and list 4 more. Christmas, love that she's setting that one up, getting ready for the holidays. Baby fund, her baby is due in March. Taxes, given the fact that she's self-employed and taxes definitely start to look a little bit different when you're self-employed, she's got a bucket for this. And I absolutely agree that this should be there. She already has $10,000 in this bucket. So we've got a starting balance there. And lastly, auto insurance. This is something that she pays once a year. It's an annual premium, but it's $850. So I figured this could be something that she sets aside funds for gradually throughout the year so that it's not one large expense every January. She can just save towards it. But as of today, that one's at zero. And I'll go ahead and fill in these top two. Baby fund is at zero and Christmas is at zero. Now, what I like to do with the savings bucket tracker is obviously you want to list all the ones that you want to set up and list your starting balance for each, which we've done. The next thing I like to do is set goals for them. But I think we'll pause on that to go a little bit deeper into her numbers, start crafting her budget, see just how much extra she has to work with, because that's going to influence what we can set as goals and how much she can save per month to reach those goals. The last thing that I like to look at before jumping at the budget itself is investing. She actually doesn't have any investment accounts set up right now, but she does have that rental property. So in that way, she is investing, but we want to set her up to perhaps set up a solo 401k or a SEP IRA, definitely a Roth IRA as we look at 2025. So let's jump forward now to a money calendar. And this is a visual representation of how money is going to move over a calendar month. So if we're looking at November 2024, what I've done is I have filled in the dates on this 2-page spread and I've written in bills. I've listed them on the day that they're due. What I'll go ahead and do here is mark her payday, which is always the first of the month, and she does want to budget monthly. Typically, monthly budgeting is something that I try to steer clear of because with monthly budgeting, you're having to go quite a while before you do another reset with your finances. But in her case, she's pretty involved. She likes to look at her numbers weekly to make sure things are on track. So she's already got those habits that I would like to see for somebody who's going to end up budgeting monthly, so I'm good with it. So we've got her payday marked here for November 1st. So I'll check this off here. I've already listed the bills and subscriptions. This budgets line here in the checklist is really just to make sure that we understand that your budget cycle matches your pay cycle, right? So every payday should be kicking off a new budget. In her case, the entire month is the budget. The entire month is the pay cycle. So we can mark that off. Special events, we can go ahead and list Thanksgiving down here on the 28th. Kind of special events, holidays, we want to make sure we get those in there because those will inevitably impact our finances. All right, but let's assume that about covers it. So we can mark off special events, holidays. Let's assume travel is not applicable here and credit cards are not applicable here. So this is her money calendar for November, and we can use this to craft her budget. It makes it that much easier to put everything together. Again, goals might be something to come back to. We first got to kind of see how much discretionary income are we working with? What can we do? And then we can come back and revisit these monthly goals. But here we have our 2-page budget spread. This is the 8-part budget. We're going to follow the 8 sections of this framework in order to make sure we're getting after our financial goals in a way that makes sense. We're directing our dollars in a winning order. This budget is going to cover the entire month of November. And I do think it helps. Before I go any further, I'm going to go ahead and draw out her account structure. This is not one that I've done yet in a Millionaire in the Making video, but I think it is massively helpful. So let's look at this, especially because she's self-employed. If we look at her account setup, she's going to have personal checking, personal savings. She's going to have business checking, and I definitely recommend business savings as well. Let me show you how these are going to work together and how money flows inside of these accounts. Now, all the money that she brings in as a business owner, aka her revenue, is going to flow into business checking. This is the account that she'll use to cover her business expenses, right? Website hosting, Canva, her office rent, all those things would get covered using this account. And an important calculation here is revenue minus those business expenses is going to give us profit. And why do we care about this? Well, a good rule of thumb, if we're talking about an LLC that isn't filing as an S Corp, which maybe we can touch on a little bit later, is to set aside 33% of profit every single month for taxes. Self-employment taxes are just a different animal. So typically though, if you follow that rule of thumb, that 33%, you'll be setting aside enough so that come tax time, if you're going to pay in one full payment once a year, you'll be ready to go. So she's going to calculate revenue minus expenses, And she's going to transfer from business checking to business savings 33% of that profit. And it's good to do this just every single month, stay on top of it. But that's that tax savings that's going to sit inside of this business savings account. I also think this is a good place for her business emergency fund. So that's the role that this one plays. I've seen some business owners who set up a second business savings account for funds that they're going to end up reinvesting in the business. So maybe they'd like to hire more services. They're going to outsource email marketing or content creation, whatever it might be. So they give those reinvestment dollars their own place in a separate business savings account. Could also put it here. That comes down to preference. So all the money that came in is her revenue. She's got her business expenses. We figure out the difference between them. That's her profit for the month. And 33% of that should go into business savings, set aside for taxes. What's left after that is fair game for her to pay herself. And that's going to be a transfer from business checking to personal checking. And again, important to note here that she's structured as an LLC. Essentially, this is a sole proprietorship situation. So she's not filing as an S Corp, which would indicate payroll, which is much more formal and works differently than this. In her case, this would be the appropriate money flow. So her paycheck would come in here. When we look at personal savings, ideally high yield savings, this is where she would put her personal emergency fund and any of those other buckets that you saw me list earlier. So home maintenance, car maintenance, Christmas, those would go here in her personal high yield savings account. With all of this in mind, and as we look at her November budget and prepare to draft it, a good way to do this would be for her to be kind of a month ahead, at least for her business income, to use October's earnings. She mentioned that a reliable minimum for her in terms of revenue to her business is $20,000. And then her business expenses are $5,400. Now, just as you saw here on the other side, we need to make sure that we calculate 33% of this number, and that's going to represent tax savings. So 33% of that $14,600, it's about $4,818. So when we figure out what she's going to pay herself, $20,000 revenue minus her business expenses, minus the amount that she needs to set aside for tax savings, and what that's going to leave her is $9,782. So this is the figure that you're going to see me use in her budget. So we have her business income of $9,782, and then we have her rental income, which is $5,100. We add these together, it's about $14,882. With our income block ready to go, let's jump into her expenses. We want to make sure, first and foremost, that her needs are met. So here are her fixed expenses for the month of November. We've got mortgage on that rental property here at the top, electric also being due on the 1st, rent for the apartment that she shares with her partner, and then you can see more utility payments and minimum debt payments. So these are just her fixed expenses, basically those ones with a due date. Now let's capture variable spending for things like food, fuel, etc. All right, and those are her monthly estimates there. Let's also make sure that we budget a cushion, which is going to serve as a bit of a safety net inside of her personal checking account. We're going to give every dollar a job in this budget, so we need a little bit of wiggle room here. That is the role of this cushion. And this needs to cover a whole month. So I'm going to go ahead and make this $300. Now, when we add all these expenses together, we're looking at $6,653.88. So the income that she's bringing in minus all of her expenses would leave her $8,228.12. So over $8,200 left to work with for the month of November once her needs are met. Before I go any further, there's something that's going to heavily influence how I set up the rest of her budget. And that is the fact that when we look at her tax savings bucket for her business, I mentioned before that she's starting with $10,000. This is good. She's got a starting point. But I can all but guarantee that that is not going to be enough. Look again at the minimum revenue that she provided to me of $20,000. If $20,000 is the minimum revenue in her business expenses throughout this year, right? We're now at mid-October. Her business expenses throughout the year have floated between $5,400 and $6,000. So this $14,600 has been a pretty consistent profit figure for her month over month, which, as we calculated earlier, 33% of that would be about $4,800 every single month that she should be setting aside for tax savings. So if we do the quick math of that being approximately $5,000 per month that she should be setting aside for tax savings, we're at October, really she should have about $50,000 set aside for tax savings so far. And when we look at the whole year, we're probably looking at about $60,000 that she should have saved once the year ends for tax savings. She's only sitting at 10. So I can relate to this, and I can speak from experience. When your business has a strong year and you are filing essentially sole proprietorship, right? You're not filing as an S corp. You're looking at this 33% of your profit. I mean, this is hefty. This hurts, right? And this is a big year for her. I mean, I think last year she mentioned that her revenue was like a quarter of what it's going to be this year. So it's really, her business is really taking off. We don't want her to be blindsided come tax season, seeing this huge figure that she's not ready for. She did mention that she's got a CPA who really works the numbers. And when we look at 2025, she's going to start doing quarterly tax payments, which will be great because she'll be able to check in on these figures every 3 months and not really fall behind. But she's going to make one large payment in spring of 2025. She's got some things working in her favor tax-wise. She's a homeowner, so we can factor in depreciation, some other deductions and credits. But if she has been earning $20,000 minimum per month, I mean, she mentioned the range is $20,000 to $30,000 per month, and these are her business expenses, she needs to have more in that tax savings. Now, this number that we put in her November budget, this incorporates that 33% tax savings. So she would be good for October's figures, right? This would be based on October's earnings. So she's good for the month of October, but we're behind. So as I look at her budget and this $8,200 plus that she has left going into Section 2, I'm going to be keeping that top of mind. We're going to make sure to be attentive to what we need to be attentive to, but always lingering there is going to be, we need to make hefty contributions in November and December into that tax savings. But we take this $8,200 and we go into the emergency fund contribution block, Section 2. We want to assess the health of her personal emergency fund, not her business emergency fund, but her personal one, which is at $1,000. But if we flip back to her emergency fund worksheet, a month of core expenses for her is about $6,300. So $1,000 is just not enough. We're not just going to look at what's left in her November budget, that $8,200, and dump everything that we need to reach this number in her personal emergency fund. We don't want to do that because there are other goals to consider that we'll talk about as we get deeper into the budget. And we've got some catching up to do with that tax savings. So again, I'm not going to neglect Section 2. We're going to go ahead and list here $500. And again, this is her personal emergency fund. All right, so if we put 500 there, that's leaving us 7,728.12, and we keep going. Section 3 is extra debt payments. These are going to be payments beyond the minimum that help her accelerate that debt payoff. And this section is for high interest debt. She has 2 high interest debt lines, and they're those personal loans. Now, I know that leading up to this point, she's been following the baby steps, which you might have heard of. There's a 7 baby steps. It's Dave Ramsey's program. Baby step 1, save that $1,000. Baby step 2, really be intense towards your debt. So her temptation is going to be to take this 7728 and put it all towards that personal loan and really make a dent. But again, let's step back. There are still 5 sections of the budget left, and we need to stop at each and ask questions. Let's plan to put $750 extra towards that first personal loan, and we're going to keep advancing in the budget. And just stay with me here to see it all come together. Block 4 is investing. She doesn't have any investment accounts set up just yet, but given the circumstances, I'm not going to suggest that we kickstart this right now. We're not quite ready to press on the gas just yet. We will in early 2025, but not just yet. There's just under $7,000 left to work with in this budget as I start to consider savings. So I go back to the savings bucket tracker. I look over these 8 buckets and I try to determine what's a reasonable goal that we can set for these, knowing that where we really need to be aggressive is tax savings. So with that top one there, emergency fund, we spoke about this when we were doing Section 2 of the budget, but the first goal, the starter goal for the emergency fund is 1 month of expenses saved. I'm going to round that up to about $6,400. Similar logic for the business emergency fund. Let's set a starter goal of 1 month of expenses saved. She's at $1,000, but the goal being $5,400, which is what a month of expenses looks like for her right now. For home maintenance, a good rule of thumb is 1% of the home's fair market value being set aside every year for maintenance costs. Historically, she's just budgeted about $300 a month to go towards any costs that might come up. It should definitely be a bucket when you are a homeowner. We're going to set a goal for that one of $4,000. And as I go through these, the idea being that she would reach these goals by the end of 2025. So roughly 14 months to reach these goals. But we're going to get started with them, if possible, here in November of 2024. The last one on this page is car maintenance. And this one's really going to depend, how old is the car? Have you done the routine maintenance of oil changes, tire rotations? That'll dictate what we list here, but I think a good starting point is $1,000. Now, Christmas is coming. There's not a lot of time left to save for this. So this is going to be kind of an urgent item for us to save for, but given everything, I think she should definitely plan on a more modest Christmas. So what I listed here was a goal of $700. I guess modest is relative, but I digress. So with this in mind, given that Christmas happens in December, I'm going to put $350 and $350 in my plan to save row. This would be what we're going to budget for. That way she'll reach that goal. For the baby fund, she mentioned in her application that she wants to save $7,000 and her baby is due in March. So that means that we've got November, December, January, February, March, 5 months to build this up to $7,000. That equates to $1,400 a month for 5 months. So we're going to start that here in November, and she'll need to continue that into the new year and save $1,400 in January, $1,400 in February, and $1,400 in March. And I'll just go ahead and put that note there of March 2025. The taxes savings bucket. This is the one that's really calling the shots. We've got $10,000 in place, but we're almost to the end of the year. We were looking at that $5,000 a month that would need to be set aside for tax savings, and the fact that we're already basically 10 months in. There are other things going on in her financial situation that will lower that tax obligation for the year, but I'm just going to go ahead and put here $50,000. I would rather her oversave than just be blindsided come March or April of next year. Now, when I drafted November's budget, I already wrote in that $4,818 going into tax savings. Like, that's already accounted for the November budget. But I'm going to see just how much I can increase this number as we finish out blocks 5 through 8 for her budget. And it'll be the same number that I use in December in terms of a projection. This is definitely something that's going to carry into 2025. She's going to have to put in some work in early 2025. If she's got higher earning months in November and December, that will certainly help her. Same thing for Q1 of next year. If she's floating more towards that $30,000 revenue figure for these upcoming 4 or 5 months, that's going to be great because it'll help her get even closer to this goal. And lastly, auto insurance. That's an annual premium, $850, due every January, but she doesn't have anything set aside just yet. Let's go ahead and put $425 in November and December as savings lines so that she can reach that goal in time for the payment. All right, I'm flipping back to the first page. I'm going to write in a couple things. She's already in the habit of budgeting about $300 per month for home maintenance costs. I think we can keep that up. Again, we have just under $7,000 left to work with in this budget. I'm going to go ahead and put $310 for November and December for home maintenance. We'll put $250 per month for car maintenance so that we're starting to get that going. And then these top 2 lines being her emergency funds. Let's see if we can swing $500 a month for each of these. In other situations, we'd be far more aggressive than that, but let's proceed with $500. So for each of these, starting with $1,000 and then adding $1,000 more means she'll end the year with $2,000. The same is true for the business emergency fund. So let's flip back to November. We're going to fill in this block with the projected savings that we listed here back on the savings bucket trackers. All right, so I've squeezed all that in there and I'm leaving a placeholder here for that tax savings because I'm going to see just how much I can put there. These figures here would add up to 3,235. So what I've got so far, 3,235, and it would leave 3,74312 in the budget. Giving came through in her application. It's important to her. I think that we can uphold it at $100. So I've got that listed there. As we look at blocks 7 and 8, this is more of that personal spending, fun money, or something that is a priority to her. And block 8 is really where I would put that therapy line, which is $600. Now, her call, she could temporarily pause those therapy sessions. That would be a nice boost that she could then go up and put here into tax savings. But even I know the value of therapy. She's getting ready to have her first child. Sometimes those first months after having your first child can be really tough. So that's her call. I am going to go ahead and still list it here. The 8-part budget is value-based budgeting. So let's keep that in here and see what it leaves us. Okay, it would leave just north of $3,000. And I would put all of that, every last penny, into tax savings. This tells me that realistically, if we go back to the savings bucket tracker, for this tax bucket, I already had the $4,818 factored in when I created her income block. So that's there. But we can add another $3,000. And then we could do the same thing in December. So if we take that 10K and then we add together these contributions, if she's able to stick with this, she would end the year at $25,636. 2 months is just not enough for us to reach this goal in full, but she can use Q1 of 2025 to continue to propel this forward and try to get as close as possible. Again, this may be a little bit too high, but I'd rather her oversave than just be completely shocked when she sits down with her CPA. And that brings me to my next point. I think it's worthwhile for her to sit down with her CPA and explore potentially filing as an S Corp in 2025 so that she can have a more favorable tax situation. She definitely has those profit levels now where she can pay herself a consistent amount, which is kind of one of those checklist items that you want to make sure is there before S Corp becomes part of the conversation. But she's there. So if she can anticipate that these higher earnings will continue into 2025, that is a worthwhile conversation for her to have because it will lower her tax obligation if she can keep this income up. In looking ahead at December's budget would be nearly identical. So with all of this taken into consideration, I mean, the series is called Millionaire in the Making. If in the short term, she's focused on these tax savings and starting to work that into her routine so that she doesn't fall behind, what could her investing projections start to look like? I imagine she'll be caught up tax-wise and she'll be in her rhythm by next summer. And then the focus will be continuing to grow both emergency funds, but also accelerating the payoff of that personal loan. Keep in mind too, though, that with the baby in the picture, there will be additional expenses. So she'll have to make adjustments there, but if she's able to really press on the gas with investing, maybe when she's 34, and that's really when things kick off, keep in mind, she's still got that rental property and that's generating a nice bit of cash flow for her, and that'll continue. But if she can get to a point, say at age 34, where she's pressing on the gas with investing, maybe she's putting $2,000 a month into a solo 401k, SEP IRA, Roth IRA, mix of those. And if she kept that up, she'd be in a position to retire around 60 with the equivalent of $5,000 a month in today's dollars, and that could continue until she's 85. Now, if business is really good and she's able to pay those 2 personal loans off very quickly, invest above and beyond that $2,000 a month, keep investing in real estate, every bit of that just moves that timeline left to where she can retire even earlier. I hope you enjoyed today's walkthrough. Self-employment and variable income definitely add a bit of complexity to budgets, but I promise it's still doable and it doesn't have to be hard or time-consuming. Don't let taxes slip away from you if you're self-employed. Weave those tax calculations into your monthly routine and transfer the funds so that they're out of sight and ready for when the time comes. If you would like to be featured on Millionaire in the Making, look for the link to apply in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.